The power of storytelling has been carried down for generations. However, the art has unfortunately been lost among men. Today's guest and author discusses how he started writing stories to stay connected with his son while he was deployed on military duty. We then talk about the importance of good stories to raise our boys into good young men, his conversion to the Catholic faith, and what life looks like as a father, author, and JAG lawyer. Stay with us.
Welcome, gentlemen, to another edition of the Catholic Gentleman Podcast, and we're happy to have you with us as we are interviewing a guest who many of you might have heard of, or more importantly, heard of the works that he's produced. That's the Prince Martin Epic series, and I don't know about you, but my kids absolutely love these books. I've been reading them to them for years, and they just keep coming, which is really delightful. So we are joined today by the author of the series, Brandon Hale. To just introduce Brandon a little bit for those of you who may not be familiar with him, he is the author of the Prince Martin Epic, a rhyming action adventure book series for boys. He's an adult convert to Catholicism who first considered the faith when he read the biography of J.R.R. Tolkien in 2002. And Brandon holds the rank of commander in the U.S. Navy, serving as an attorney in the Judge Advocate General's Corps. And he has 20 years combined active and reserve service. And for his civilian day job, he has worked in federal law enforcement for the past 15 years. He lives in the Oklahoma City area with his wife, Stephanie, and they have 5 children ranging in age from 6 to 18. The idea of the Prince Martin Epic came to Brandon when he told his young son Prince Martin stories on the phone when he was deployed overseas. For fun, Brandon enjoys reading and writing fiction, lifting weights, shooting, hunting, fishing, and four-wheeling on his family's 160-acre Lazy H Ranch in northeastern Oklahoma. And so thank you so much for being with us, Brandon. We're so glad to have you.
Hey, guys, I appreciate it. Good to join you. Thank you.
Well, wonderful. Yeah. And I love how, these stories that really have reached, I don't know how many, maybe you could share a little bit, but like thousands of Catholic young people at this point, my kids included, they just came out of your own storytelling to your kids. And my kids love having me tell them stories, even though I don't consider myself very good at it. But when did you kind of tell us how you got started telling those stories to your son? And then when did you kind of decide to take the leap into maybe writing it down into a book?
Yeah, so in 2015, I was deployed overseas. I was a reservist at that time, formerly active duty. I'm still in the reserves, but I was deployed overseas for 6 months. And I had a 4-year-old boy at home named Thomas. And when I could call home during the deployment, I'd talk to my wife, I'd talk to my daughters, but when I talked to Thomas, after a few weeks, he just kind of got tired of talking to me. I mean, he's a 4-year-old kid talking on the phone, didn't have a lot of patience for it. And I felt kind of like we were losing our bond because he'd always been my sidekick and did everything with me. And then I get sent off for 6 months. And so I started racking my brain, how can I connect with the little guy while I'm gone? And so when I'd talk to him, I'd start telling him a Prince Martin story, and I'd just make one up on the spot. Unlike the books, my stories didn't rhyme. I couldn't make up rhymes on the spot, but I'd tell him a story, and he loved it. And the next time I'd call home, he'd beg to talk to me, and I'd tell him a story, and I'd call home again, and he'd beg to talk to me. So it worked out. And then when I got home, he still wanted to hear those stories. My wife suggested to me, well, why don't you try writing one, turn it into a book? And so I thought about it. I thought, okay, that'd be fun. And I started to write in prose. And it just seemed a little bit boring. And I reflected on all the books I've read to my kids over the years and how the ones I didn't mind reading for the 10th, 50th, 100th time in a row to a kid were the ones that rhymed and would just kind of roll off my tongue. And, a Dr. Seuss book, for example, Horton Hatches an Egg, or The Grinch Who Stole Christmas. I could read that book 1,000 times and it's still kind of fun to read because it flows. And so I resolved to try to put the books in rhyme. And unfortunately, I don't have any natural rhythm. And it was my wife who pointed out to me that I wasn't understanding what using this tetragrammatic, this rhyme scheme that I use. I wasn't putting the emphasis on the right syllables. And so I started studying how it was done in other poems and tried to fix it, and eventually got to where I could do it fairly successfully. So that's the short story of how those books came about.
Wow. I think that's really exciting, and what a blessing to your son and to all of us that you in a way manned up to stay connected with your son. I think that's just incredibly powerful. And I just appreciate you doing that. I appreciate your service. That's a fun and impressive story. So you didn't have previous experience, I'm hearing, on writing. You just had to learn it. Did you find that it came by naturally for you? Or, I mean, forgive me, when you finally got into the groove, did you feel like this was something you were meant to be doing? Has there ever been that aspect? Because I know you've come out with a lot of series, and you're probably continually sharpening your skills and honing them. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, well, as a lawyer, I'm used to writing a lot. And so writing comes naturally. Expressing myself in the written word has always been natural for me. And after writing these Prince Martin books and spending hundreds, thousands of hours in this anapestic tetrameter verse style, I can almost think in that rhyme scheme now, which is a little bit odd. I'll be driving down the street and a line for a book will come to me. And so the development of that has been fairly natural. I'll tell you what I do is when I write in the morning, I'll get up really early in the morning, like 4:30 in the morning, and write for an hour. And it's kind of like compound interest. If you write for an hour every day, it starts to add up pretty quickly, and you can crank out some books that way. But what I'll do is I'll write for an hour, and then I'll go lift weights, or I'll go on a run, and I'll swipe my fingers down on my iPhone and have the robot voice on my phone read back to me what I've written. And if the robot voice sounds pretty good, then I know I've got the emphasis on the syllables right, and I know I've got the rhyme scheme right. And I can catch a lot of my own mistakes by listening to the robot voice while I'm exercising. So I get about 2 hours in every day doing it that way.
Wow, that's fantastic. There's a lot of discipline involved, of like pushing yourself to just get up every day, just do it. The challenge for writing is always that creativity doesn't always strike when you want it to. And so just that discipline, that grind of just getting up and just writing. So how did you find the illustrator? And do you guys have more books in the works?
Yeah, the finding of the illustrator is a fun story. It doesn't exist anymore, but there used to be a G.K. Chesterton Society here in Oklahoma City, and we would meet and we would discuss and read the books of Chesterton at an Irish pub here in Oklahoma City. And then afterwards, we would just hang out and talk. And it was just a group of guys, probably about 10 to 15, sometimes 20 Catholic guys. And I was talking to a small group of them after one of our meetings about this book I was trying to write, and how I'd tried my own hand at illustrating the book and how my illustrations were terrible. And a friend of mine said, well, I might be able to do it. And he's a graphic designer by trade and by education. And Jason Zimdars is his name. And he took a stab at drawing Prince Martin and what he thought he would look like and some of the other characters in the story. And I loved his work, and we've been working together ever since. We actually go to the same parish together, and we're friends, outside of the series. He's a good friend of mine, and he's really talented at drawing, and I'm moderately talented at writing. And putting the two together, I feel like we've come up with a fun series of books for boys.
Oh, that's exciting. Let's actually talk about those series of books for boys, because there was, other than the great story of why you got into them, there's like a direct intent behind those books. And I think that's really important for all of us to hear, because we live in society right now where we all love the hero's journey, right? We're it's just kind of a part of the archetypal nature of men to go on adventures and to see other people do the same thing. But what we have to look at today is like the Marvel superheroes, right? And the Marvel superheroes, Hollywood is let's say, uninspired or inspiring at creating superheroes that not only maintain their virtues, but also fight against vice. Very often we see individuals like Tony Stark or Batman, or these people who have both, great virtue and great vice, and they kind of uphold the two as if they have to work together, but that's not really great storytelling. And so you, having a history with Tolkien and Chesterton, as you just mentioned, you kind of understood those things. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the intent behind your book and what you're hoping to pass along to the young men in our lives, and in the Catholic faith.
Well, I think that boys want to be challenged, and I feel like society as a whole doesn't challenge boys as much as they're capable of being challenged, whether it's being challenged morally or physically. And reading the books that were available to boys, I was underwhelmed insofar as I felt like they were, if not scatological, kind of gross out type books, or books that were just silly and absurd and didn't challenge a boy in any way, didn't challenge his vocabulary, didn't challenge him to aspire to the acquisition of virtue, didn't challenge him physically, overcoming a difficult situation physically by mustering up one's grit to get through something difficult where you feel like you want to quit, but the right thing to do is to push ahead. And so I wanted to create books that challenge boys in that way, to make them develop those virtues, those acquired habits that become virtues, to become good men someday. And I just wanted to try to, in my own very limited way, baptize the imaginations of boys when they're young, and maybe when they get into difficult situations as teenagers, wanting to quit the wrestling team or whatever, they'll remember books they read as a boy and be like, nope, I'm not going to quit. I'm going to push ahead. Or, in the Christian life, all the difficulties we face and how easy it is to turn aside or go astray and to draw back on something, even rattling around in a boy's subconscious that he read as a kid. That's my modest hope of how I can contribute.
So just kind of one of the things I appreciate about the Prince Martin series, and I hope this isn't received the wrong way, but is that the Catholicism is kind of in the background. Like, you're not leaning, like Prince Martin isn't going to church and like receiving the sacraments and things like that. And the reason I think that's important is this implicit Catholicism, this, like, it's the virtues, the values, the truths of our faith, like, obviously influence the whole journey of like chivalry that Prince Martin is on, and like going from a boy to a man, and like growing in that way. And yet you see with like Tolkien and things like that his faith was also informing everything he wrote about, and yet it was kind of in the background. And yet there's kind of a power in that. And so I'm just wondering, like, has the audience for this expanded beyond, Catholics? Have you heard from other people who maybe aren't Catholic, but who like deeply love these books and like have gained something from them and kind of absorbed some of those Catholic values unknowingly, if you will?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've gotten lots of emails and letters from boys who I can tell come from evangelical families, and I welcome that, absolutely. And not to compare myself with Tolkien, but looking at how the master did it, his Catholic faith was implicit in everything he wrote, and maybe not even always conscious. I think he once said that it was implicit and unconscious in the original writing, and more conscious in the revision of his stories. And his books take place in a pre-Christian world. I like to think of the Prince Martin story occurring in a world 50,000 years ago that may be covered over with water right now. So it is certainly not explicitly Catholic or even explicitly Christian, but my Catholic Christian worldview is absolutely implicit in what I've written. And I try to be subtle, and I have no agenda with the stories as far as advancing any aspect of faith other than advancing a Christian worldview. And I want it to be implicit, and I don't want it to be considered to be an allegory or anything like that. But I do think that people with eyes to see and ears to hear will certainly pick up on and recognize symbolism that would certainly be considered Catholic if you knew what to look for, and Christian, just the sacrificial life of Christ, I think, is reflected in every book. The manful picking up the cross and carrying it. I think there's that theme in every book, a theme of sacrifice and manfully carrying your cross. I think that is in all of my stories so far.
Excellent. And so tell me a little bit about your conversion story. So you were at Baylor and not Catholic, and then you decided that Catholicism was the way for you. What did that look like?
Yeah, it was really just a grace, I think, for me. I grew up in a Christian home, went to a Methodist church. I had wonderful parents who instilled the faith in me, and we prayed as a family. We read Bible stories as a family, and I went to church every Sunday and youth group every Wednesday night. And then my parents very graciously sent me to Baylor, which is a fine Baptist school, and I had a good experience there. And frankly, in growing up and going to public schools, I don't think I ever knew any Catholics. And I certainly never thought about Catholicism, which is probably an inadequacy in my own education and history, and mainly in world history. But I don't think I ever consciously thought about Catholicism. Throughout growing up in high school and college, I think I knew Catholics were Christian, but sort of Christian. I thought it was like an odd variation of Christianity that had no effect on me, at least. And it wasn't until I was in law school and I started taking my own faith more seriously that I was reading a lot of C.S. Lewis, and I was reading other Christian authors like C.S. Lewis. And the Lord of the Rings movies had just begun coming out. That trilogy had just begun showing. I think the first movie came out, and it rekindled my own love of Tolkien, which began when I was in middle school and all through high school. I read the series several times, and The Hobbit, and loved the stories, like absolutely loved them. And watching that movie made me reread the series. And then I thought, I want to read a book about Tolkien. I want to learn about Tolkien himself. And I was at a time in my life when I was in law school, and I was already doing lots of reading, lots of writing. And so I was very into studying something hard and considering it carefully. Had no kids. And so I had an unusual period of my life where I had time to study Catholicism. And so it was in that context that I read this biography of Tolkien by Joseph Pierce, who's a wonderful writer. And I was shocked to discover that Tolkien was Catholic. And then I was further shocked to see how his Catholicism had so informed the books he'd written. And then I started realizing, okay, well, I certainly has never picked up on that before, but that's really interesting. The limbus bread, how that is almost a symbol of the Eucharist. It never occurred to me. I didn't heard of the Eucharist, didn't know what it was. And so reading about Tolkien, who I thought was a very saintly person, I thought, well, if Tolkien was a Catholic, well, maybe there's something to Catholicism. And so then I started reading a lot of the books that many converts had read: Peter Kraft, Scott Hahn, Patrick Madrid, Thomas Howard. And I started reading book after book after book. I was in my second year of law school. And then I told my wife, hey, there's actually something to this. And I would pass on the books that I read to my wife, and she was skeptical, to say the least, at first, but then she started reading the books and she was just as convinced as I was. And so we were received into the church. It'll be 20 years this feast of the Assumption in August. And we were received into the church in August because I was shipping off for Navy duty the next month to begin my Navy career. And but for J.R.R. Tolkien, and but for me coming across The Hobbit as a middle schooler in Tulsa, way back in the 90s, I don't think I would be the Catholic that I am today. Which has been the greatest grace that has ever happened to me.
What a journey. That's exciting. And so you decided, so you were in law school, so you decided you wanted to become a lawyer. When did you decide that you wanted to enter into the military, or was that always kind of in the back of your mind as you were walking through law school?
Yeah, I think I wanted to go into the military before I wanted to be a lawyer. And it's because it's funny how the things you, and this is kind of my thought with writing these books, it's funny how the things that you experience as a kid can color your impressions for the rest of your life. So I first saw the Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson movie, A Few Good Men, when I was probably in 8th grade, maybe freshman year of high school. And I thought, wow, this is a wonderful movie. How cool would it be to be a Navy JAG and trying cases in a military court and interviewing witnesses in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. This is exciting. This is very dramatic. And watched the movie several times. And in college, I just thought, that's what I want to do. I want to become specifically a Navy JAG. And so I went to law school and started applying as soon as I could to try to become a Navy JAG. And I'm glad I got in when I did, because it's become a lot harder. I doubt they'd take me now if I was just applying in the first place. But I was lucky enough to be accepted into the program when I was in law school. And then after law school, I shipped off and did my Navy training and 5 years of active duty. And then I've been in the reserves now for about 15 years.
Yeah. So being a convert to Catholicism, like, how has that informed all the different dimensions of your life? I mean, as a husband, as a father, as a professional, and someone in the military, like how has being Catholic kind of shaped your development and growth as a man?
I think something I really like about it is that there are Catholic churches anywhere you go. If you go on vacation, you can go to mass because there's a Catholic church. If you're overseas for some reason, you can go to mass because there's a Catholic church. If you're on a military installation, you can go to mass because there's a chapel with a Catholic chaplain. And in my day job, there is a Catholic church just down the street, and I can pop in twice a day if I wanted to. I'll go to daily mass once or twice a week. I can pop in for confession very easily. And just having the access to the sacraments through the physical presence of Catholic churches everywhere has been something I really like about being Catholic. I certainly like the sacrament of confession and walking out knowing that my sins are forgiven and feeling it as well. It's just a sense of peace that comes from that. And something else I like about being Catholic is just the inexhaustible well of enriching books that have been written, over the past 2 millennia. If you read something from St. John Chrysostom or St. Augustine or St. Thomas More or St. John Fisher, all the way up to the present. Walter Chiswick is someone, I think he's a servant of God, but I'm not positive. Maybe he's a blessed Walter Chiswick, but he wrote a book called He Leadeth Me. And gosh, I can't think of a better book than He Leadeth Me or With God in Russia for a man, just about, taking your faith seriously and embracing the difficult parts of being a Catholic in this culture, in this day and age. You read about Walter Chiswick and these other underfed Catholic prisoners in the Gulag who in these sub-zero temperatures would skip lunch. They were underfed to begin with, but they would skip lunch to go sneak off into the woods to celebrate mass in secret. That's taking your faith seriously. And it makes me feel ashamed, of my own lukewarmness in so many ways when I read about someone like Walter Chiswick, Father Chiswick, and his faith, or Father Vincent Capodanno, who was a Navy chaplain who died on the battlefield in Vietnam. Lieutenant Capodanno, he was ministering to a Marine who had been shot, and then I'm not sure if the Marine had been shot or if he was injured, but he was ministering to a Marine. And while doing so, Father Capodanno caught 17 M16 bullets in the back, and it killed him. There's so many inspiring stories like Emil Kapan, the Kansas farm boy who became a Catholic hero in the Korean War. And just the superabundance of inspiring stories about saints or soon to be saints or people who should be saints that are available to us as Catholics and can just give us examples to aspire to. I think that's been something that has been a huge blessing to me in my own faith and my own journey as a Catholic man.
Well, Brandon, I'm going to jump right in, and I want to talk to you about fatherhood because you've got 3 daughters and 2 sons. You've definitely had to learn a lot. Not only did you have this experience of storytelling and how it can help your boys, But what are some of the pearls of wisdom and things like that you've been utilizing to help your young boys become men? Here at the Catholic Gentleman, we're really big on these rites of passages and things like that to help guide men. You've experienced a rite of passage, both in marriage and in Navy, no doubt, and things of that nature. So I'd love for you to spend just a moment and share with us, some of your thoughts on fatherhood and what we can be doing to help raise better men that are more capable of handling the evils and attacks of the world.
I remember reading one time that whether a kid keeps his or her faith as an adult has a whole lot to do on how seriously or unseriously they perceived their father's faith growing up. Not necessarily their mother, but their father's faith growing up. And so I have tried to be, to the best of my ability, a spiritual leader, as a father in my family, trying to initiate Bible stories or saint stories or prayers with my family. We, of course, always go to Mass on Sunday, which is a given. But as far as rites of passage go, there's something that I certainly didn't come up with, but I've been the beneficiary of. My son goes to an all-boys Catholic school called St. John Bosco here in the Oklahoma City area. And they have, I think they started it, but they're at the very least very involved in this pilgrimage called the Three Hearts Pilgrimage that goes from, about 36 miles away from Clear Creek Abbey, and you hike on foot 36 miles to Clear Creek Abbey. The pilgrimage ends at the Abbey. And I wasn't able to do it last year because I had military duty, but the year before I did it for the first time with my son. And I felt like that was just a wonderful opportunity to do something physically difficult with him. My legs were killing me after the first 25-mile hump on that first day. And I thought at the end of that first day of walking 25 miles, I think it was, that I'm not sure if I could have gone another mile if I wanted to. Started getting blisters at the end of the day. And, he kept up the whole time, and he was, I believe, 9 or 10 years old. I thought that was pretty impressive for a 9 or 10-year-old to be able to keep up and not complain. But then you spend the night camped out in a tent, and the next morning you finish up and do another 16 miles, and you end up at the pilgrimage. And it's almost like an arduous journey, and you have heaven in your sights at the end of the journey when you see the big Abbey church up there. And I feel like that's a really neat rite of passage for a kid, especially a Catholic kid, to do something physically hard and then have that reward at the end. They had barbecue waiting for us and drinks, and there was a Mass. And then you hop on a bus and go back to your car and drive home. And looking forward to doing that again in October. And my son is too. And it's grown every year. And it's a really neat opportunity for a father and a son to bond together, doing something difficult and offering up that difficulty to Christ and his church, and for reparations for sin and that type of thing.
I think that's excellent. And I completely agree with you. I think us men need to be looking for those opportunities to do things like that with our sons. So that's exciting. I hadn't heard of that.
Yeah. And something else I like to do with my boys is just last week, I guess they were out for spring break. And so I took them up to my folks' place. As Sam mentioned, they've got 160 acres up near Skiatook Lake in northeastern Oklahoma, and they have a house there. And that's a great opportunity. It's a boys' paradise, really. My parents have a bunch of deer stands, so we can deer hunt in the fall. And there's a stream to catch bass in. There are ponds to catch catfish and perch in. There's all kinds of targets if you want to do archery, if you want to shoot AR-15s, if you want to shoot pistols, if you want to shoot revolvers, if you want to go squirrel hunting with a 22, you can do that. You can ride four-wheelers all around. And something else that's important too is it's not just fun, but you can do some work too. So my son and I, my older son, Thomas, he and I spent about 6 hours last week cutting limbs with loppers to clear the trail so you can drive around and not get your car scratched up. And he was helping my dad fix a four-wheeler, and both my boys got to ride the tractor. So getting my kids outside in the fresh air and physically doing something, whether it's something fun or something helpful or both, has been a blessing that my parents have that place that we can go up and enjoy. And I think it's something that enriches their experience of childhood as a boy to be doing stuff that all boys love doing if given that opportunity.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah, that's really wonderful to have those experiences with your sons. And speaking of your sons, I'm to switch gears a little bit. I'm curious, like the son that you originally started telling stories to, like, what does he think of the current progression of the Prince Martin epic?
Yeah, that's always a good barometer for me, is what he thinks, because he doesn't mince words. And if he doesn't like it, whatever. But he just finished my newest book. Jason and I had a book come out, number 7 in the series. And he was reading it. He's like, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. And then by the end, he goes, "Oh, Dad, it's so good." And so that was about as good of an endorsement as I could hope for, is having a 12-year-old boy saying, "Dad, it's so good," and him wanting to keep reading and skip doing something fun to push through the book and finish it. That's pretty encouraging to me. And I've had, it's been really wonderful having just random kids from Australia send me an email saying they like my books, or some kid from overseas. It's hard to imagine that I would have someone overseas wanting to read books that came out of my head, but it's really rewarding to get feedback from boys who love the books, or hearing from their parents about how much they like the books. Something else that's been rewarding has been having parents of kids who have dyslexia or autism. For some reason, I have no idea why, my books resonate with those kids. Maybe because they rhyme. That's just me speculating. But I've had numerous people who have kids with dyslexia or autism write back and say, "My boy does not like reading any books, but for some reason he likes reading your book." And that's been pretty cool to get feedback like that.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's exciting. You mentioned something about imagination. You talked about sparking imagination. What do you feel has happened to kind of our modern youth? Do you feel like the imagination has been dwindled, that individuals are, constantly, we all know we're constantly being attacked by noise and stuff like that, but I'd love for you to speak just a little bit about imagination and how you're hoping to spark imagination. You mentioned something like that, in the beginning.
Yeah, I think the ubiquity of screens has a stultifying effect on a kid's imagination. If you're outsourcing your thinking to screens, if you're outsourcing your entertainment to, the 7th iteration of some movie, I don't think there's a whole lot of creativity in Hollywood, or at least there's not a market for it, because you keep seeing these old franchises being resurrected, or, number 7, the 7th installment of some movie. Like, come up with something new. Yeah. And I think that kids' reliance on screens to entertain themselves so much can really have an adverse effect on imagination. And, we're not immune to it in my house, but I do try to get my kids outside doing stuff, either helping with a project or doing something fun outside. Or I don't know how many times I've told my kids, we're going on a hike, whether you like it or not, we're going on a hike, and they'll complain and gripe about it and not want to go on the hike. But inevitably, when we're taking the hike and we're on the hike, they're having fun. When they're throwing rocks in the stream and skipping stones, or wading in the creek, at that point they're having fun. And then when I say it's time to go, sometimes they're complaining about not wanting to go home yet. So just forcing them to get outside, I think, is the biggest battle. And then once they're outside and having fun, then the creativity kicks in, and they start making up games and imagining, forts and fights and battles and doing stuff like that. I don't know how many hours I spent as a kid, getting decked out in army gear with toy machine guns and toy pistols, and having battles with friends. Or, I lived in Venezuela as a young boy. And if there was ever a boy's paradise, it was living in Venezuela in the 1980s. I could go out in the backyard. My dad gave me a BB gun when I was 6 years old. You'd probably go to jail if you did that today. But my parents gave me a BB gun and pocket knives, and I could climb mango trees. My dad built me a tree house, and there was big iguanas in the trees. And I could go out hiking, traipsing through the forest as much as I wanted to as a kid. And there were lagoons where the locals would be catching caiman. I can't remember if they're caiman crocodiles, alligators, caiman alligators, actually, catching them with spools of line and hauling them in and hacking them to death with a machete. But just some vivid memories I have of a kid of growing up in this really exotic place that Venezuela was in the 1980s, and being able to drive an hour and you'd be at the Caribbean and snorkeling in crystal clear water. And gosh, I feel like I had such a fortunate experience as a young boy getting to live in a place like that I've tried to, in my own limited way, replicate that, or at least approximate some of those experiences with my own kids.
Yeah, that's great. I admire that intentionality, and it's like you just leave kids to themselves. In this modern world, they're probably going to just atrophy. Whereas in the past, like if you left them to themselves, they'd probably go on adventures and do all kinds of crazy things. But like now, you got to kind of give them a nudge. You got to give them a push and get them out the door. So that's something we can all learn from. I think it's just being intentional about it, like you're saying. So I guess what's next for you? More Prince Martin books? Are you going to explore other forms of authorship? Where do you plan to go from here?
I was actually brainstorming about that this morning, because each of my Prince Martin books so far, and there are 7 of them, are designed intentionally to grow with the kid. The first book is, for a 6-year-old, probably having it read to him by his mother or father. The second book is maybe for a 7-year-old, third book maybe for an 8-year-old. And this most recent book has kind of pushed the edge of how far I want to go with complexity and length. And so it's for ages 10 and up, this most recent book I've got. And writing a book that's 244 pages in rhyme and trying to have the rhyme not be unpalatable rhyme takes a lot of time. And I'd like to kind of go back and maybe do a spin-off series that's a prequel to the first Prince Martin book that is really a picture book series about Prince Martin, explaining the part, taking someone on a tour of his castle. And that's something I have in mind. I've been talking to Jason about, is maybe a prequel to Prince Martin that's for a 5-year-old boy to read, and he can, see all the weapons in the armory of the castle and have encounters with knights who protect the castle, and understanding the different parts of the castle, and maybe having some cameos from characters who we see in the Prince Martin epic proper. In those 7 books, having cameos in the prequel. So that's something I'm toying with. I'm not sure if I want to do something more complicated and more complex than the most recent book that we pushed out.
Yeah, wow. 244 pages of rhyme is seriously impressive, I have to say.
I agree. I agree, Brandon.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's kind of hard to turn off the rhyme scheme in your head when you've been polishing that rhyme scheme. You don't want to start talking in it.
Yeah, rhyming to your coworkers and inadvertently.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Brandon, your life has been an adventure, and I just feel blessed for you to join us and to share all that with us. Where can men go to learn more about you, learn more about your series and the future?
Yeah, princemartin.com. So www.princemartin.com is the best place to look. It's got all the books for sale, information about the books, information about my friend Jason, the illustrator, and me, and kind of the origins of the series. And, the books are also available on Amazon or whatever, but princemartin.com's got them all accessible in one place. You can also download the first book for free, at least the grayscale black and white version of it. We have both color versions of our books and then a less expensive black and white version of each book. And you can download the first book for free and see if it's to your taste. And I appreciate you guys having me on the show. This has been fun. I've never been on a podcast before, so thank you for inviting me. And when you contacted me earlier this week, I never would have imagined I'd be on a podcast this week. So it's been fun.
Well, you're most welcome. Yeah, what a blessing to us, Brandon. So thanks so much for all the work that you're doing and for joining us today.
Yeah, well, thank you guys. And good luck to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. As we end each of our episodes.
Be a man, be a saint.